Seinäjoki City Library, it's a typical middle-sized town central library. Its room program and also functions are quite typical in that way. But the very special thing is the building site there. It's just by the civic center designed by Alvar Aalto, which is very unique and valuable architectural masterpiece, this area and surrounding building. So everything was considered in relation to Aalto's architecture. And you can see it in the forms and also spaces and functions in this building. And also we try to achieve kind of a dialogue to Aalto also, Aalto's architecture, not make it just in contrast to Aalto. You can find some echoes of Aalto's architecture in this building.
Yeah, I think Seinäjoki Library is in a way, it's also representing new generation of libraries. That libraries used to be for books, storing books, and nowadays they're more or less, or more and more becoming living rooms for the cities. So that's one of the only places where people can sit and gain knowledge, and they don't have to pay for the whole thing. When we start the design process like this, we don't exactly know how it's going to look like in the beginning, so it's done step by step from looking carefully at the situation or the surroundings, and then it's a bit of a surprise what comes out at the end.
When we think about Nordic society and consider the fundamentals of it, I think maybe the most important things are equality and democracy and openness of our society, and somehow I think this building also represents those values.
Nordic society, it can also, Nordic welfare society can be described as a successful model of communism, where you can have an American dream, that you have equal opportunities, and you are able to, start from a family background that without any, your parents didn't have a university education, and then you're able to step up in the society. And then you need some places, some public places where this kind of thinking or knowledge is respected. So in a way, libraries and schools are a bit like infrastructure for this kind of society. Sounds nice, actually, that if you think about being in somebody's shadows, protected by the sun, that can be positive, actually, but also can be seen as negative. But I think architects, they cannot exist on their own, in a way, on their own island, separate from influences of the society. So I think young architects spend maybe 10 or even 20 years learning the tradition of, for instance, in our case, the Finnish tradition of making architecture in a very detailed way. And it's a bit like learning the grammar and the vocabulary of how architecture is done.
If you are part of another shadow, you should be shadowed by yourself also. So shadow of what? We are architects, we are a shadow. So what's the origin?
Yeah, I think the dialogue of the building with its settings, I think, I remember once when at school I was making a schoolwork without any setting or any context. And it's a bit paralyzing and extremely difficult to do something when you don't have the starting point. So it's the dialogue, it's the starting point, and it's also the ingredients for getting started to go to certain direction. And without that, I think at least I would feel a bit lost. I think I would go back to the metaphor of the grammar and the vocabulary, that the legacy is maybe those elements, and then progress is something that you are making a poem, for instance. You're saying something about with these elements. So you, in a way, you need to have a safe background and safe legacy, and then you feel better to create something on your own.
Architecture obviously contributes to society in a very direct, functional way by providing most of the realm where society happens. I mean, almost everything is done indoors nowadays, and unless you consider architecture only as a kind of niche cultural part of like a massive mass of real estate, which is wrong way to look at it, obviously. I mean, everything we build is architecture, so then that's the contribution. But then the kind of, if you consider the intellectual part or the kind of, in a way, influence of smart architecture and planning decisions, it maybe creates connections between functions that are not the kind of primary ones, but creates kind of meetings and collaborations, and or at least enhances and enables these meetings between different parts of society and between the different members of society, whether it's organizations or individual people or groups of people or different populations or different citizens of different members of different teams in a way. So that's obviously what a lot of Kilden is about. That it's about creating collaborations between these different art groups, and then creating meetings between different audiences, and then from that something new is born, and then some of that maybe then even transfers from the foyer into these flat floor halls and generates new art.
When talking about Nordic architecture or Finnish architecture, I think the legacy thing is interesting in the sense that maybe the surroundings were not so set. For example, in Finland, maybe not in Norway, as in other parts in Europe, for example, for modernists. So there was a sort of cleaner table to build up the cities.
In general, I think a lot of contemporary architecture is really reactionary to the setting. So you have to have something that's there, like old atmosphere, old functionalities, paths, and then directly through this kind of diagrammatic exercises, new architecture is born out of the setting. So what I feel like is actually a kind of lacking from contemporary architecture, and what Kilden to a certain extent actually brings to the table is creating very new settings and kind of creating meanings to places which are kind of lacking of those. If you think of like American university campuses, for example, a lot of them have been built in places where there is no built setting at all, and then through historical, very formal, symmetrical architecture, the architecture creates the setting for the first time, and then contemporary architecture in those campuses is then reacting to this stronger traditional architectural setting. So what obviously Kilden reacts to the pier front and the views and so on, but it also manages to create like a new setting to that area, which is then actually now continuing when they are building the harbor like south from the site. So Kilden kind of started a new part of town in that area.
As far as Finnish master architects go, we've been concentrating lately actually on Pietilä, because we're renovating two of his perhaps main projects at the moment, and that obviously has an influence on us at the moment. But no matter how progressive or just plain different your building is from its context or from the context of the tradition of that country, I mean, obviously you're always a part of a continuum, no matter how much you try to separate yourself from it.
And also architecture sort of reflects the values of the society a lot. What is being built and how it's being built, and also sort of even more direct ways what the architecture itself is telling about our culture and values currently. And it's sort of, in some sense, architecture is quite sort of permanent. It sort of tells the story of our time in the future. Sort of it's part of the society's memory, and in that sense, all art forms are in the shadow of the other art forms and culture and economics and so on. And maybe the shadow that Sverre is talking or was talking is not a bad shadow, but it's like a good and pleasant shadow to protect you from the burning sun.
A major issue in the development of this work was, to me, how to balance the different aspects of the work, because the work is meant to be a very good environment for those working in the buildings. So the staff, because of course working in a crematorium is a kind of difficult environment. So balancing both to get the best quality for the staff that are working in the building, as well as giving a dignified environment for those mourners who come here. And this is an interesting question because probably in older times the aspect of how the environments around the mourners were more important. And that also goes for Aspelund's old crematorium nearby. But in this case, and that's the whole reason for this, the interior of the building, which is completely characterized by its very light quality of the walls that are all in situ cast white concrete. And the concrete, the white is not from pigment, but the white comes from actual white cement. There's a white Danish cement, all white cement, and the ballast in the concrete is dolomite cross. And this quality was aimed, from my point, to create an interior that has a kind of mild, should we say, character of clemency. So those working, but also mourners coming in, will feel sort of embraced in a light and kind of gentle environment. Though, of course, as it is a technical facility, it also needs to be durable. So therefore, the concrete is, of course, a very strong material, and there are trucks taking the coffins here and there and into the incinerators. So therefore, the concrete is, of course, a good and very robust material. So this combination in the concrete of being both very light as well as durable is important. And also, it's very evident, I think, or at least it's palpable for those who are here, that the building process can be perceived in the walls in the interior of the building. And that comes from that there's no post-treatment done once the formwork of the concrete casting has been dismantled. So it's very evident through the borders between all the formwork that this is, you can perceive how the production has been done. I think that every building in one way or another does relate to its surroundings. If it's a very quiet or a sort of a mute building, it still relates with that as its character. Though in this particular project, I've been asked this frequently, how it's related to what's around, the famous buildings and the landscape by Leverance and Asplund. To me, that was a minor issue when I worked on it, because this building in itself and the actual program contains such an important aspect of ritual life that has been throughout the history of mankind. And the thing about burials of people is, of course, such a timeless thing. So to me, the relation on how to do how this is related to its settings deals rather with the issue of how do you bury people and how do you cremate them, for instance. Naturally, architecture always contributes to society. Architecture is a kind of an applied arts, as opposed to, say, art, if it's sculpture or painting or something like that. So architecture is always a useful structure for whatever function it may have. Then there could be different levels of how it transcends the cultures of its time. Some buildings obviously have lasted for millennia. Others are used a short time. But in every way, of course, architecture always contributes to society. Yes, in this issue of legacy in culture, it brings to mind a quote from Gustav Mahler, the composer, who I think said that tradition is not the worship of the ashes, but of keeping the fire alive.